I thought I might tell a few stories that were all related to being a pilot and the airlines, one very small segment of my entrepreneurial world. But the first one I enjoy telling is I went up to the Denton Airport to the FBO up there to learn how to fly. And when I was standing there talking to the general manager and setting up the deal, another man was there also, and he was there to learn how to fly. And so he and I got to talking, and we decided, well, let's take our lessons together. When you're in the pilot's seat and the instructor's next to you, I'll be in the back and I can listen and learn, and then when we'll reverse places, and then we can do our ground studies together. So that was a great program, and it worked out well. And we have 4 or 5 lessons, and I get up there for another lesson, and the instructor, Bill, said, George called and he's got some family problems and he can't make it today, so you and I'll take the lesson today. We check the plane out, take off, go out west of Denton and do our training and come back in. And when we come in, we normally do a few touch and goes. So I did 2 or 3, and on the next touch and go, the instructor said, now when you land, pull over on the runway side there and stop. And I did. And he said, Jay, I'm going to get out and you're going to solo. And I said, my God, Bill, I can't solo. George makes a perfect landing every time he lands, and I've screwed. He said, yes, you've screwed up every landing you've made, but that's the reason you're going to solo. Said, I know that if you get in trouble or something gets screwed up, you'll straighten it out and correct it and make us, you'll live through the landing. I don't have any idea what George will do if he has a problem. And until I do, he's not going to solo. And I've always thought that that was such an incredible lesson about learning and realizing that those that have gone down the road ahead of you look at things and understand things so much differently and more expertly than you do. It stuck with me forever.
And the entrepreneurial principle is we learn more from our failures than we ever learn from our successes, because with our successes, by definition, they're already something we know how to do.
Well wrapped up. Another of my great flying stories is when we were in Tahiti. I decided that I would like to, for Benny and I to go up and look over the islands from above. And so I went to the FBO, and there was a man in front of me at the counter, and he was also a tourist wanting to rent a plane. And the guy behind the counter said, well, sir, here in Tahiti, to rent a plane, you have to have a French pilot's license. And this U.S. citizen thought, he said, well, could I just hire an instructor to fly with me so I'd be legal and I can fly and enjoy the flight over the islands? And he said, fine. And he called in the back, an instructor came out, they went back to check out the plane and take off. And I walked up and said that I'd like to rent a plane. And he said, well, like I just told the other guy, you have to have a French pilot's license. And I said, well, what's involved in getting a French pilot's license? He said, well, you have to go to the building next door, show your U.S. pilot's license, and give them $10. I have a French pilot's license. We, on that same trip in Hawaii.
Hang on, the entrepreneurial principle is
Ask.
entrepreneurs ask.
Absolutely. Ask and ye shall be received. Knock and the door shall be opened. In Hawaii, I wanted also to fly around the islands and went into the FBO, and the guy said, well, I'm here alone. I've got to take a guy up that's going to 6,000 feet and jumping out to land at a beach party. But when I get back, I have to give you a check ride before I can rent you the plane. but that'll be a while. And time was a little pressing, and I said, well, the fact is that anybody can take off. It's the landing that's the only question. And your parachutist has to be in the back anyway. Why don't I ride up front, and after you throw him out, I'll take my check ride on the way down. Worked out beautifully, and Betty and I had a nice lunch in Maui. And the best pilot story is...
Hang on, entrepreneurial principle, jump.
We were on a cruise, and Betty and I had to be back a day ahead of the cruise scheduled to leave Athens and fly back. So we had to get into Athens a day ahead of the ship, or half a day or whatever. And the last stop before Athens for the cruise ship was Crete, the Isle of Crete in Greece. So as it happened, the seas were rough, and we got into Crete like 8 hours earlier than we had planned on. Our flight out of Crete to Athens was at 7 o'clock that night, and then we had like a very early morning flight on to the States to make this wedding that we were set up for. So I went up to the Olympic counter, and they fly just like Southwest, the 737s. And they're a small airport. At the counter, there was a door behind the counter that went out on the tarmac and a big plate glass window. As I walked up, there was a couple ahead of me, and I heard the gal at the counter tell them that and they also wanted an earlier flight to Athens. And she said, well, sir, we have the flight you see out there on the tarmac right behind me is going to leave in about 45 minutes, but there's only one seat on it. And he said, oh, my wife and I want to fly together. We'll wait for the 7 o'clock, and they walked off. And so I walked up to the counter and said, I think you said that flight leaves for Athens. She said, yes, in about 45 minutes, but there's only one available seat. I said, that's perfect. She looked at me, and I reached in pulled out my wallet and flipped down my commercial pilot's license. Keep in mind, the biggest plane I ever flew held about 12 people. It had 2 engines, but be that, she looked at my commercial pilot's license, turned around, walked out the door, walked up the rolling staircase onto the plane. She comes back about a minute and a half later, lays my pilot's license down and said, that'll be fine. So, Betty
Did you
sits...
fly the plane?
No, he sat with the pilots.
I just wanted to sit in the cockpit. I knew they had an extra seat up there.
So Betty got the
She got
boring seat.
No, she got the seat back by the restrooms.
Back door.
The pilots were delightful. They pointed out all the sights as we flew into Athens and invited us to dinner. We made the next morning the early flight, got back for the wedding, had a lovely evening, had time to see the Acropolis. Ask and ye shall receive.
So Jay, did you have to buy 2 tickets or 1?
He doesn't remember.
That's a minor issue. Maybe we all had already bought tickets for the 7 o'clock, I guess, so we just used
They
them.
oversold the flight.
So, I think with that, we ought to pass on to another legend storyteller.